The fluorescent lights above my hospital bed buzzed like angry wasps, casting that sickly yellow glow that makes everyone look like they're already halfway to the grave. I guess in my case that wasn't far from the truth. My name is Michael, and 3 weeks ago I was a healthy 34-year-old construction foreman in Detroit, Michigan. I had calloused hands, a strong back, and a future that stretched out ahead of me like the interstate highways I helped build. Today, I'm lying in Henry Ford Hospital with acute pancreatitis that the doctors say has progressed faster and more aggressively than they've ever seen. Your pancreas is essentially destroying itself, Dr. Martinez had explained earlier, her kind eyes unable to hide the gravity behind her words. The inflammation has caused severe necrosis. We're doing everything we can, but that word hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. The pain started on a Tuesday. I remember because it was the day we were supposed to pour concrete for the new community center downtown. I was bent over checking the rebar alignment when this knife twisted in my gut, so sharp and sudden that I dropped to my knees right there on the worksite. My crew thought I was joking at first. Big Mike, tough as nails, doubled over like he'd been sucker punched. "Come on boss, quit fooling around," Tommy had laughed until he saw my face go gray. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and 4 needles. By the time we reached the ER, my blood pressure had dropped so low they thought I might be bleeding internally. The tests came back showing inflammation markers off the charts. Within hours, I was in the ICU, and within days I was fighting for my life. The worst part wasn't the physical pain, though that was unbearable even with the morphine drip. The worst part was watching my wife Rachel's face change over those first 2 weeks. The hope in her eyes dimmed a little more each day as the doctors delivered increasingly grim updates. Rachel and I had been married for 8 years. We met at a Lions game. She was there with friends, I was there with my construction crew celebrating the end of a big project. She spilled beer on my jersey when Detroit scored a touchdown, and instead of being mad, I asked her if she wanted to get dinner after the game. She said yes, and we'd been inseparable ever since. We'd been trying to have kids for the past 3 years. The fertility treatments, the disappointments, the hope that built up and crashed down month after month, it had tested our marriage in ways we never expected. But we were finally in a good place. Rachel had just gotten a promotion at the marketing firm where she worked, I'd been offered a supervisor position with the city, and we'd started talking about adoption. Now she sat beside my bed every day, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, still wearing her work clothes because she rushed here straight from the office. She'd hold my hand and talk about anything except what was happening: the weather, her co-workers, the stray cat that had started coming around our backyard. "You know what that cat did today?" she'd say, forcing brightness into her voice. "He figured out how to open the gate latch. Smart little guy. I think he's adopted us." But I could see it in her face when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she'd stare out the window, the way her shoulders would shake just slightly when she thought I was sleeping. She was preparing to lose me even if she couldn't say it out loud. My mom flew in from Phoenix the second week. Mom was a small woman, barely 5'2", but she had the kind of strength that came from raising 3 boys as a single mother after my dad died in a factory accident when I was 12. She'd worked double shifts at the diner, made sure we all graduated high school, and somehow still found time to come to every baseball game and school play. "You're going to beat this," she whispered, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. "You're too stubborn to let a pancreas get the better of you." But even Mom's optimism couldn't hide the fear I saw when she talked to the doctors in the hallway. I could hear the hushed conversations, the medical terms that sounded like a death sentence: multi-organ failure, sepsis risk, palliative care options. By the 3rd week I'd lost 30 pounds. My skin had turned a sickly yellow from jaundice, and even breathing felt like running a marathon. The pain medication made everything fuzzy, but not fuzzy enough to block out the reality that I might not see my next birthday. That's when they called Father Williams. I hadn't been to church regularly since I was a kid, but Rachel was raised Catholic, and when you're dying in a hospital bed, denominational differences don't seem to matter much. Father Williams was an older black man with gentle hands and a voice like warm honey. He'd been ministering to families at Henry Ford for over 20 years, and he had the kind of presence that could calm a room just by walking into it. "I'm not here to give you last rites unless you want them," he said, settling into the chair beside my bed. "I'm here to talk, to pray if you'd like, or just to sit with you. Whatever you need." We talked for hours. About my childhood, about Rachel, about the life I thought I'd have versus the one I was living. He didn't offer empty platitudes or promises about divine plans. He just listened, and when I was done talking he asked if I'd like to pray together. I'm not sure what I believed about God in that moment, but I knew I believed in love, the love I had for Rachel, the love my mother had shown me, the love I felt from friends who'd been visiting every day despite the visiting restrictions. If there was something bigger than all of us, maybe it was that love, multiplied across billions of people, creating something that could heal what medicine couldn't touch. Whatever happens, Father Williams said before he left that night, you are not alone in this. The next morning, Dr. Martinez came in with a different look on her face. Not the carefully controlled expression of a doctor delivering bad news, but something that looked almost like confusion. Michael, I need to run some more tests, she said, studying my chart. Your latest blood work shows some unexpected changes. Good unexpected or bad unexpected? Rachel asked, gripping my hand so tight I thought she might break my fingers. I'm not sure yet. That's why I want to repeat everything. Your inflammation markers have dropped significantly overnight, and your white blood cell count is normalizing. It could be a temporary improvement or... She trailed off, not wanting to give us false hope. But for the first time in 3 weeks, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. The possibility that I might actually survive this. How long for the results? I asked. A few hours. Try to get some rest. But rest was impossible. Rachel paced the small room like a caged animal, and I found myself staring at the ceiling, afraid to hope, afraid not to hope. Outside the window, Detroit sprawled under a gray October sky, and somewhere in that city, my crew was probably working on the community center without me, laying the foundation for something that would outlast all of us. I thought about permanence then, about the buildings I'd helped construct that would stand long after I was gone, about the love Rachel and I had built that felt stronger than concrete and steel. Maybe that was what healing really meant. Not just the body repairing itself but the spirit finding something worth fighting for. The afternoon dragged by like traffic on I-75 during rush hour. Rachel tried to distract herself by organizing my get-well cards for the 100th time, arranging the flowers that had been sent by my construction crew, my high school buddies, even some of the city officials I'd worked with over the years. Look at this, she said, holding up a card with a cartoon bulldozer on it. It's from little Timmy next door. He drew you a picture of yourself driving a big yellow truck. The drawing was crude but heartfelt, a stick figure with a hard hat sitting in what looked like a submarine with wheels. It made me smile despite everything, reminding me of the simple faith that kids have, the belief that good things happen to good people and that tomorrow will be better than today. As the sun began to set outside my window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor, I found myself thinking about all the moments I'd taken for granted. The smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the weight of Rachel's head on my shoulder while we watched TV, the satisfaction of a job well done at the end of a long day. If I got through this, and that was still a big if, I promised myself I'd never take those moments for granted again. At 8 o'clock that evening, Dr. Martinez returned with a small army of medical professionals, specialists I'd never seen before, residents with clipboards, and a nurse who immediately began checking my vital signs with unusual intensity. Michael, we've reviewed your test results multiple times, Dr. Martinez began, pulling up a chair close to my bed. I'm going to be honest with you, what we're seeing doesn't align with the typical progression of your condition. Rachel's grip on my hand tightened. What does that mean exactly? Your pancreatic enzyme levels have dropped by 60% since yesterday morning. The inflammation that was destroying healthy tissue has not only stopped progressing, it's beginning to reverse. Your kidney function, which we were monitoring closely due to the risk of organ failure, has actually improved. One of the specialists, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, stepped forward. I've been treating acute pancreatitis for 30 years, and I've never seen this rapid a turnaround in such a severe case. We want to run a full body scan tomorrow morning to get a complete picture of what's happening. Are you saying he's getting better? Mom asked from her spot by the window where she'd been keeping vigil. We're saying the trajectory has changed significantly. But we need to be cautious about drawing conclusions too quickly. Sometimes patients experience temporary improvements before. Dr. Martinez paused, choosing her words carefully. Before things progress differently. But there was something in her voice, a note of wonder that hadn't been there before. Hope, maybe, or professional curiosity, or both. After the medical team left, the three of us sat in silence, afraid to voice what we were all thinking. Rachel's eyes were red-rimmed from weeks of crying and sleepless nights, but for the first time she wasn't trying to hide her emotions behind forced cheerfulness. I prayed every night, she whispered. I'm not even sure what I was praying to, but I prayed anyway. I bargained with God, with the universe, with anyone who might be listening. I told them they could take anything else, my job, our house, our savings, just please don't take you. I pulled her closer, feeling stronger than I had in weeks. Hey, you're not getting rid of me that easy. We still have that kitchen to remodel, remember? And someone has to teach that stray cat some manners. Mom laughed through her tears. That cat's got more sense than both of you. He knows a good thing when he sees it. That night, for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I slept without the crushing weight of impending doom pressing down on my chest. I dreamed about building something beautiful, not the usual dreams of construction sites and concrete trucks, but something different. A house with wide windows and a garden where children could play, where Rachel could grow the tomatoes she'd always talked about, where Sunday dinners would stretch late into the evening with friends and family around a table that could expand to accommodate everyone we loved. When I woke up the next morning, the sunrise was painting my hospital room in shades of gold and pink, and for the first time in 3 weeks I felt hungry. The morning brought another round of tests, blood draws, scans, ultrasounds that seemed to go on forever. Each technician wore the same expression of professional curiosity mixed with something that looked like amazement. Word was spreading through the hospital about the construction worker who was defying medical expectations. Dr. Martinez returned that afternoon with the results, and this time she wasn't trying to hide her smile. "Michael, I've consulted with colleagues at Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic. I've sent your scans to some of the best pancreatic specialists in the country. And while we still can't explain exactly how or why, the evidence is clear. You are healing at a rate we've never documented before." She pulled up my scans on the computer screen beside my bed. Even to my untrained eye, the difference was dramatic. Where 3 weeks ago there had been dark areas showing damaged tissue and dangerous inflammation, now there were clear, healthy-looking images. The necrotic tissue is regenerating. Your enzyme levels are approaching normal ranges. Most remarkably, your pancreatic function appears to be restoring itself completely. In medical terms, what we're seeing is unprecedented. "So he's going to be okay?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than okay. If this trajectory continues, he'll make a full recovery. No long-term damage, no chronic conditions, no dietary restrictions beyond what anyone should follow for good health." The room erupted in a chaos of tears and laughter and hugs that were probably too tight for a recovering patient, but I didn't care. Mom was crying and praising God in both English and the Spanish she'd learned from her own mother. Rachel was kissing my face and apologizing for her tears getting my hospital gown wet. And I was laughing, really laughing for the first time in almost a month. "There's something else," Dr. Martinez said once we'd all calmed down slightly. "This case is going to be studied. With your permission, we'd like to document your recovery for medical journals. What's happened here could change how we understand the body's capacity for healing. Whatever might help someone else going through this," I said without hesitation. That evening, Father Williams stopped by for what we'd all assumed would be our last conversation. Instead of finding a man preparing for the end, he found me sitting up in bed eating solid food for the first time in weeks, and planning for the future. "Well," he said, settling into his familiar chair beside my bed, "this is a pleasant surprise." "Father, I wanted to thank you," I said. "That night we talked, when you said I wasn't alone in this, I think that's when things started to turn around." He shook his head gently. "Michael, I've seen many people in situations like yours. Some recover, some don't, and I've learned not to claim credit for outcomes that are beyond any of our understanding. What I will say is that you were surrounded by love from Rachel, from your mother, from friends who never stopped believing in you. Love is a powerful force for healing. Do you think it was a miracle?" Rachel asked. Father Williams considered the question carefully. "I think healing always involves some element of mystery. Whether you call it a miracle or medicine or the remarkable resilience of the human spirit, what matters is that you're here, you're getting better, and you have the chance to live the life you were meant to live." As he prepared to leave, he turned back with a gentle smile. "Just remember, Michael, survival isn't just about getting your old life back. Sometimes it's about building a new one." That night, as Rachel curled up beside me in the narrow hospital bed officially against regulations, but the nurses had stopped caring about minor rule infractions, I thought about Father Williams' words. The man who would walk out of this hospital wasn't going to be exactly the same man who'd been wheeled in 3 weeks ago. I'd seen how fragile life could be, how quickly everything you take for granted can disappear. But I'd also seen the incredible power of human connection, the way love could sustain you through the darkest times, and the miraculous capacity of the body to heal when everyone had given up hope. "What are you thinking about?" Rachel whispered in the darkness. "About second chances," I said. "About how we're going to do things differently when I get out of here." "Different how?" I thought about the fertility treatments we'd put on hold, about the adoption papers we'd started but never finished, about all the ways we'd been waiting for the perfect moment to really start living. "I want us to adopt that little girl we met at the agency," I said. "Sophie, remember? The 7-year-old who asked if we had a dog because she'd always wanted one." Rachel lifted her head to look at me in the dim light filtering in from the hallway. Are you sure? After everything we've been through? I'm sure. Life's too short to wait for perfect circumstances. And that stray cat in our backyard could use some company. She kissed me softly, and I could taste the salt of happy tears on her lips. I love you, Michael. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I love you too. And I'm going to spend the rest of my very long, very healthy life making sure you never doubt that. Outside our window, the city of Detroit stretched out under a blanket of stars, full of people building their own lives, facing their own challenges, hoping for their own second chances. Tomorrow I'd take another step toward going home. Tomorrow we'd start building something new. But tonight, it was enough to be alive, to be loved, and to believe in the possibility of healing that goes deeper than medicine alone could ever reach. 2 weeks later, I walked out of Henry Ford Hospital on my own 2 feet, carrying a small bag of belongings and a folder full of medical records that would puzzle doctors for years to come. The October air in Detroit felt crisp and clean in my lungs, and everything, the sound of traffic, the smell of fallen leaves, the sight of people hurrying down the sidewalk seemed more vivid than I remembered. Rachel had decorated our small house in Dearborn Heights like I was returning from war. There were welcome home balloons tied to the mailbox, a banner stretched across the front porch, and when I opened the door, the smell of my favorite meal, her grandmother's lasagna recipe, filled the air. "Welcome home," she said, and the simple words carried the weight of everything we'd almost lost. The stray cat was waiting for us in the backyard. He'd grown bolder in my absence, and Rachel had clearly been feeding him regularly despite claiming she was just leaving some scraps out occasionally. He was a gray tabby with white paws and intelligent green eyes, and when he saw me, he approached cautiously, as if sensing that something significant had changed. "Hey there, buddy," I said, crouching down slowly. "I hear you've been taking care of things while I was gone." He allowed me to scratch behind his ears, and I swear I could feel him purring from 3 feet away. "We need to give him a name," Rachel said, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, trying to look stern despite the smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "How about Lucky?" I suggested. "Seems fitting. Lucky it is." The first few weeks at home were a careful dance of recovery. I was supposed to take things slowly, gradually building back my strength and stamina. Rachel had arranged to work from home for the first month, and she watched me like a hawk, making sure I took my medications, ate the recommended foods, and didn't try to do too much too quickly. But the hardest part wasn't physical, it was mental. When you've come that close to dying, when you've felt your body failing despite the best medical care available, it changes something fundamental in how you see the world. I found myself hyper-aware of every ache, every moment of fatigue, wondering if this was the beginning of another medical crisis. "It's normal," Dr. Martinez assured me during my first follow-up appointment. "You've been through a traumatic experience. Your body is healing beautifully, but your mind needs time to trust that healing. I'd recommend talking to someone, a counselor who specializes in medical trauma." The counselor's name was Lisa Thompson, and her office was in a quiet building near downtown Detroit. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the kind of presence that made you feel safe telling her things you'd never said out loud. "Recovery isn't just about the body returning to normal," she explained during our first session. "It's about integrating this experience into your life story in a way that allows you to move forward without being paralyzed by fear." We talked about survivor's guilt, the weight of knowing that other patients in that hospital hadn't been as fortunate as I was. We talked about the way trauma can make you feel disconnected from your own body, like it's something that betrayed you and might do so again. And we talked about the strange gift that comes with surviving something that should have killed you, the clarity about what really matters. "What do you want your life to look like now?" Lisa asked during our third session. I thought about that question for a long time. "I want it to count for something," I finally said. "I want to build things that matter, not just buildings but a family, a community, something that will outlast me." "Tell me about that." I told her about Sophie, the 7-year-old we'd met at the adoption agency before my illness. I told her about the community center I'd been working on, how I wanted to get back to work but also do something more meaningful. I told her about the cards and letters I'd received in the hospital, not just from friends and family, but from people I barely knew who had heard about my story and wanted me to know they were pulling for me. "There's something powerful about human connection in the face of mortality," Lisa said. "When people hear a story like yours, it reminds them of their own vulnerability, but also their own capacity for hope and resilience." By November, I was cleared to return to work, though with restrictions on heavy lifting for another month. My crew welcomed me back with a combination of relief, jokes about my vacation, and genuine affection that caught me off guard. Tommy, my lead electrician, had kept things running smoothly in my absence, and the community center was actually ahead of schedule. We figured we'd better get this done fast, he said, grinning and slapping me on the back gently, in case you decided to take any more unscheduled breaks. But it was different now. Where I used to focus purely on schedules and budgets, I found myself thinking about the people who would use this building. The families who would come here for after-school programs, the seniors who would gather for social activities, the teenagers who might find alternatives to hanging out on street corners. You know what this place needs? I said to Tommy one afternoon as we stood in what would become the main community room. A memorial wall. For people from the neighborhood who made a difference. Teachers, volunteers, veterans, people who built something lasting. That's not in the original plans, Tommy pointed out. Then we'll donate the materials and labor. Some things are more important than profit margins. Meanwhile, Rachel and I were navigating the adoption process with renewed urgency and clarity. Sophie was still available, a bright, curious child who had been in foster care for 2 years after her birth parents lost custody due to drug addiction. She was old enough to have opinions about her potential new family, and the social workers had arranged for us to meet several times before making any decisions. Do you really have a cat now? Sophie asked during our second visit, her eyes lighting up with excitement. We do, Rachel said. His name is Lucky and he's very friendly. He likes to sleep in sunbeams and chase leaves in the yard. Can I see him? That weekend we brought Sophie to our house for the first time. She was small for her age, with dark hair and serious brown eyes that seemed to take in everything. Lucky, as if sensing the importance of the moment, emerged from his favorite hiding spot under the porch and allowed Sophie to pet him immediately. He likes me, she whispered, as if afraid that speaking too loudly might break the spell. He has good taste, I said, and Sophie giggled. We spent the afternoon in the backyard, raking leaves into piles that Sophie could jump into, showing her the garden space where Rachel wanted to plant vegetables in the spring, letting her help us build a simple bird feeder from a kit I'd picked up at the hardware store. Are you really going to be my daddy? She asked me as we worked together, her small hands struggling to line up the screws properly. If you want me to be, I said carefully. Rachel and I would love to have you as part of our family, but it's important that you feel good about it too. She considered this seriously, the way children do when they're processing something that will change their entire world. I've never had a daddy who builds things, she said finally. That sounds pretty good. That night, after we'd taken Sophie back to her foster family, Rachel and I sat on our couch with Lucky purring between us, and for the first time in months, we allowed ourselves to plan for the future without fear. She's perfect, Rachel said. She's scared and hopeful and trying to protect herself while still being open to love, I replied. Sounds pretty perfect to me. The social worker called the next week with news that the birth parents had officially relinquished their rights, clearing the way for Sophie's adoption if we wanted to proceed. Yes, Rachel said into the phone before the social worker had even finished explaining the next steps. Yes, we absolutely want to proceed. The legal process would take several more months, but Sophie began spending weekends with us, gradually building the trust and attachment that would form the foundation of our family. She was a child who had learned not to expect too much from adults, but she was also curious and resilient and surprisingly funny. Michael, she said one Saturday morning as I was making pancakes, do you think Lucky was waiting for me to come live here? What do you mean? Well, he showed up when you were sick, right? Maybe he knew you would need him to help take care of someone small. I looked at her standing there in Rachel's old t-shirt that served as her nightgown, her hair sticking up in all directions, holding Lucky against her chest like he was a fuzzy security blanket, and I felt something settle into place in my chest, a sense of completion I hadn't even realized I'd been missing. You know what, Sophie? I think you might be right. By December, our lives had taken on a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. Sophie spent 4 nights a week with us, and the house had transformed to accommodate her presence. We'd converted the spare room into a bedroom painted lavender, her choice, installed a tire swing in the backyard oak tree, and child-proofed everything that could possibly pose a safety hazard. The community center was nearing completion, and I'd convinced the city council to approve the memorial wall I'd proposed. Local families had submitted names and brief descriptions of people they wanted honored, and I was working with a local artist to design something that would capture the spirit of a community that looked out for its own. This is really beautiful work, Michael, the artist, a young woman named Anna, said as we reviewed the design. But I have to ask, what inspired this particular project? I thought about how to answer that. I spent some time in the hospital recently and I got to thinking about legacy. About the ways people touch each other's lives, often without realizing it. This community center will serve families for decades, but it should also recognize the people who built this neighborhood through their daily acts of kindness and service. That's a powerful motivation, Anna said. I think this wall is going to mean more to people than you realize. She was right. When we unveiled the memorial wall at the community center's dedication ceremony in January, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Families brought photos and flowers, and people who had lived in the neighborhood for decades shared stories about the teachers, coaches, veterans and volunteers whose names were now permanently etched in stone. Father Williams was there, having been invited to offer a blessing for the building. When he saw my name listed as project supervisor, he pulled me aside. You've built something beautiful here, Michael. Not just the building but the spirit behind it. I had help, I said, looking across the crowd to where Rachel was helping Sophie hang a drawing she'd made of the community center on a bulletin board designated for children's art. The best things usually require a community effort, Father Williams agreed. How are you feeling these days? It was a question I'd been asked hundreds of times in recent months, but somehow, coming from him, it carried deeper meaning. Grateful, I said simply. Still processing everything that happened but mostly just grateful. That's a good place to be, he said. Gratitude is the foundation of a life well lived. That evening, after the dedication ceremony had ended and we'd come home exhausted but happy, Sophie fell asleep on the couch between Rachel and me while we watched a movie. Lucky had claimed his usual spot on her lap, and the three of them, my new family, looked so peaceful that I didn't want to move and risk disturbing them. We should probably get her to bed, Rachel whispered. In a minute, I said. I just want to remember this. Outside, snow was beginning to fall on Detroit, covering the city in a clean white blanket that made everything look new and full of possibility. In 3 weeks, Sophie's adoption would be finalized and she would officially become Sophie Williams. She'd chosen to take my last name, which had made me cry in the courthouse when she announced her decision. I thought about the man who had been rushed to the hospital 4 months ago, convinced he was dying, and the man sitting in this living room now, surrounded by love and purpose and the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered. They were the same person but also completely differente. The way a building foundation looks nothing like the finished structure, but everything that comes after depends on that unseen base. Recovery, I realized, wasn't about returning to your old life. It was about building a new one on the foundation of what you'd learned about what really mattered. And what mattered was this: the weight of a sleeping child against your shoulder, the warmth of your wife's hand in yours, the purring of a cat who had shown up exactly when you needed him, and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring another chance to build something beautiful and lasting and true. Spring arrived in Detroit with the kind of dramatic flair that makes you forget how brutal the winter was. The snow melted in torrents, the trees exploded with green, and suddenly everyone was outside again, walking their dogs and riding bikes and remembering what sunshine felt like on their faces. Sophie's adoption was finalized on a Tuesday in March, and she insisted on wearing the dress we'd bought for the occasion, a blue one with pockets, because as she explained to the judge, pockets are important for carrying important things. In her pocket that day, she carried a small wooden heart I'd carved for her with our new family's initials inside. Miss Sophie, the judge said with formal solemnity that made her stand up straighter, do you understand that after today Michael and Rachel Williams will be your legal parents forever? Yes, ma'am, Sophie replied. And Lucky will be my cat forever too, right? The judge smiled. I believe that can be arranged. When it was official, when we walked out of the courthouse as a legal family of 3, Sophie looked up at me with those serious brown eyes and said, Daddy, are you crying? Happy tears, I said, scooping her up for a hug. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're really, really happy. I'm really happy too, she said. But I don't need to cry about it. Rachel laughed. That's because you're tougher than both of us. That weekend, we celebrated with a party in our backyard. My mom flew in from Phoenix, Rachel's parents drove down from Lansing, and what felt like half the neighborhood showed up with casseroles and congratulations. Tommy and the construction crew came, along with Dr. Martinez and several of the nurses from the hospital who had become like family over the months of follow-up appointments. You know, Dr. Martinez said, watching Sophie chase Lucky around the yard while a group of adults cheered them on, in all my years of medicine, I've never seen a more complete recovery. Not just physically but this. She gestured to the scene around us. This wholeness. I think maybe that was the point, I said. Maybe getting sick wasn't the problem to be solved, maybe it was the catalyst for finding what was missing. Lisa Thompson, my counselor, had said something similar during our final session a few weeks earlier. Trauma can break people, she'd said, but it can also break them open. You've used this experience to create a life that aligns more closely with your deepest values. That's not common and it's not easy. You should be proud of the work you've done. The work. It had been work: the physical therapy to rebuild my strength, the counseling to process the emotional impact, the conscious daily choice to live with gratitude instead of fear, the patience required to build trust with a child who had learned not to expect adults to stick around. But it was also the most rewarding work I'd ever done, more satisfying than any building I'd ever constructed. Spring turned into summer, and our routines settled into something that felt like the life I'd always wanted but hadn't known how to create. Sophie finished second grade with flying colors and announced her intention to become either a veterinarian or a construction worker, or maybe both. She'd learned to ride the bike we'd bought her, had claimed the tire swing as her personal headquarters, and had convinced Lucky to sleep in her room most nights. "He's protecting me," she explained when we found them curled up together one morning. "From what?" Rachel asked. Sophie considered this seriously. "Bad dreams. And also monsters, probably." The community center had become a hub of neighborhood activity. The senior program was thriving, the after-school tutoring sessions were helping kids improve their grades, and the weekend family activities had created connections between neighbors who had lived blocks apart for years without really knowing each other. But the memorial wall had become something special beyond what I'd imagined. People came to touch the names of loved ones, to leave flowers, to tell their children and grandchildren stories about the people who had helped build their community. It had become a place of remembrance and renewal, a reminder that individual lives mattered and that love persisted beyond death. One evening in July, I found an elderly woman sitting on the bench in front of the wall, staring at one of the names. "Excuse me," I said gently. "Are you all right?" She looked up at me with eyes that were bright despite her age. "Oh, I'm fine, dear. I was just visiting my husband. Robert Martinez, see his name there? He was a teacher at the elementary school for 37 years. I sat down beside her on the bench. "Tell me about him." "Bobby taught third grade," she said, her voice warming with memory. "He had this way of making every child feel special, feel capable. Kids who struggled with reading would leave his classroom believing they could conquer the world. He died 3 years ago, heart attack, but I like to come here and talk to him about the neighborhood, about how it's changing for the better." "I'm Michael Williams," I said. "I supervised the construction of this building." Her face lit up. "You're the one. Bobby would have loved this place. He always said the community needed somewhere for families to gather, somewhere safe for children to learn and play." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the Detroit skyline. Finally, she turned to me with a curious expression. "Can I ask you something, dear? I heard you were very sick while building this place. That you almost died." "Yes, ma'am. Spent 3 weeks in the hospital. They didn't think I was going to make it." "But you did." "I did." She nodded thoughtfully. "Bobby used to say that sometimes we get second chances not just for ourselves, but because we have work left to do for others. Looking at this place, at how it's bringing people together, I think he would have said you had work left to do." As I walked home that evening, her words stayed with me. Work left to do. It was a different way of thinking about survival, not as a random stroke of luck, but as an opportunity to contribute something meaningful to the world. At home, I found Rachel and Sophie in the kitchen making dinner together. Sophie was standing on a step stool, carefully stirring something in a pot while Rachel guided her hands. "Daddy," Sophie called out when she saw me. "I'm making sauce. Rachel's teaching me her grandmother's secret recipe." "It's not that secret," Rachel laughed. "The secret is just love. And maybe a little extra garlic." "Love and garlic," Sophie repeated seriously, as if committing it to memory. "Got it." After dinner, we sat on the back porch watching Lucky stalk fireflies in the gathering dusk. Sophie was curled up between us, drowsy from the heat and the full day. "Daddy," she said sleepily, "do you think people can be meant for each other?" "What do you mean, sweetheart? Like, do you think I was meant to be your daughter? Even before we met?" Rachel and I exchanged a glance over her head. These were the moments when Sophie's wisdom caught us off guard, when her young mind grasped concepts that adults spent years trying to understand. "I think," I said carefully, "that sometimes life brings people together who need each other. Maybe that's the same thing as being meant for each other." "And lucky too?" "And lucky too." She nodded, satisfied with this explanation, and within minutes she was asleep against my shoulder. As I carried her to bed, I thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment, the illness that nearly killed me, the recovery that baffled doctors, the community center project that introduced us to the adoption agency, the stray cat who showed up exactly when we needed him. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was luck. Or maybe, as Bobby Martinez might have said, there was work left to do, and sometimes the universe conspires to make sure that work gets done. That August, I received a call from Dr. Martinez that would change everything again. Michael, I hope you don't mind me calling it home, but I have an unusual request. There's a medical conference next month in Chicago, pancreatic disease specialists from around the world. They want you to speak about your recovery. Me? I'm not a doctor. No, but you're the patient. Your case has been published in 3 medical journals now. Doctors want to hear your perspective, not just the clinical details, but what the experience was like, what you think contributed to your healing. I don't know what I could tell them that they don't already know. You could tell them about hope. About the power of human connection. About what healing looks like from the inside. I discussed it with Rachel that night. She was immediately supportive, even excited. This could help other families going through what we went through, she said. If there's even a chance that sharing your story could give someone else hope, don't you think you have to do it? The conference was held in a massive hotel in downtown Chicago. I'd never seen so many doctors in one place, all of them brilliant, dedicated people who had devoted their lives to understanding and treating diseases that killed thousands of people every year. When it was my turn to speak, I looked out at an audience of several hundred medical professionals and felt the same nervousness I'd experienced on my first day as a construction foreman. 6 months ago, I was dying in a hospital bed in Detroit. The doctors had done everything they could and it wasn't enough. A priest came to help me prepare for the end. And then, for reasons that none of us fully understand, my body began to heal itself. I told them about the physical experience, the pain, the fear, the gradual awareness that something was changing. But I also told them about Rachel holding my hand through the worst nights, about my mother flying in from Arizona, about the cards and flowers from friends and strangers, about Father William sitting with me when words weren't enough. I can't tell you why I recovered when others don't, I said. But I can tell you that I wasn't alone in that hospital room. I was surrounded by love, by people who refused to give up hope even when the medical evidence suggested they should. During the question and answer session, a doctor from Germany asked, "Do you believe your emotional state contributed to your physical recovery?" "I think mind and body are more connected than we sometimes acknowledge," I replied. "But I also think community matters. When people pour love into you, when they pray for you, care for you, believe in you, maybe that creates an environment where healing becomes possible." A pediatric specialist from Boston raised her hand. "What would you want doctors to know about treating patients in situations like yours?" I thought about Dr. Martinez, about the way she had balanced honesty with hope, about how she had treated me as a whole person rather than just a collection of symptoms. "Don't forget that behind every case study is a human being who loves people and is loved by them," I said. Medical expertise is crucial, but so is recognizing that healing involves more than just fixing what's broken in the body. After my presentation, doctors approached me to share their own stories, patients they'd lost despite their best efforts, patients who had recovered against all odds, the daily struggle to maintain hope in the face of diseases they didn't fully understand. "Thank you," said an older oncologist from Canada. "Sometimes we get so focused on the science that we forget the mystery. Your story reminds us that there's still so much we don't know about what makes people heal." On the flight home to Detroit, I stared out the window at the patchwork of farms and cities below, thinking about the responsibility that comes with surviving something that kills other people. Not survivor's guilt, which I'd worked through in counseling, but survivor's purpose, the question of what to do with the life you've been given back. The answer came to me gradually over the following weeks. Rachel and I started volunteering at the hospital, visiting families in the ICU, offering the perspective of people who had been where they were and made it through. We didn't offer false hope or medical advice, we just sat with people, listened to their fears, and shared our belief that love persists even in the darkest places. Sophie, now 8 and wise beyond her years, often came with us. She had a natural gift for connecting with children who were scared and confused, and the hospital staff began requesting her presence for particularly difficult cases. "She just seems to know what to say," one of the pediatric nurses told us. Yesterday she told a little boy that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, it means you do important things even when you're scared. "Where does she learn this stuff?" "I think she learned it from watching her family," Rachel said later as we drove home. "She's seen what it looks like to face difficult things with love and support." By October, exactly 1 year since my illness began, our lives had taken on a rhythm that felt both purposeful and peaceful. Sophie was thriving in 3rd grade, Rachel had been promoted to senior partner at her marketing firm, and I had started a nonprofit organization that trained construction workers to volunteer on community projects in underserved neighborhoods. The anniversary of my hospitalization approached with a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to treat it as just another day and not dwell on memories that were still sometimes difficult. But Rachel suggested we mark it somehow, acknowledge the significance of having made it through. What if we had a gratitude party? Sophie suggested. Like a birthday party but for being alive and healthy and together. So that's what we did. On the anniversary of the day I was admitted to the hospital, we threw a party in our backyard. Not a celebration of illness, but a celebration of recovery, community, and second chances. Dr. Martinez came along with several of the nurses who had cared for me. Father Williams offered a blessing. Tommy and my construction crew brought enough food to feed an army. Our neighbors showed up with children and dogs and folding chairs. Even Lucky seemed to understand that something special was happening, allowing himself to be petted by dozens of strangers without retreating to his usual hiding spots. As the evening wound down and the last guests were saying their goodbyes, I found myself standing in the same spot where, 1 year earlier, I had collapsed in agony, convinced that my life was over. Now that same space was filled with laughter and conversation, with children playing games and adults sharing stories, with the comfortable chaos of people who cared about each other gathering to celebrate something that mattered. "What are you thinking about?" Rachel asked, coming up behind me and slipping her arms around my waist. "About how wrong I was," I said. "That day when I got sick, I thought it was the end of my story. But it was actually the beginning of the best chapter." Sophie ran up to us, slightly out of breath from chasing fireflies with the other kids. "Daddy, Mrs. Chun from down the street said you helped her son get a job at the community center. Is that true?" "Jimmy's a good kid," I said. "He just needed someone to give him a chance. That's what happened to me too, right? You and Rachel gave me a chance." "Sophie," Rachel said, kneeling down to her level, "we didn't give you a chance. You gave us a chance. You made us into the family we were meant to be." Later that night, after Sophie was in bed and the house was quiet except for Lucky's contented purring, Rachel and I sat on the front porch swing I'd installed the previous month. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't gotten sick?" she asked. "Sometimes. But not in a sad way. More like wondering if we would have found our way to this life on our own, or if we needed something dramatic to push us toward what we really wanted." "And what do you think?" "I think we would have figured it out eventually. But maybe not as quickly and maybe not as completely." I took her hand, feeling the wedding ring she'd never taken off during those terrifying weeks in the hospital. "What about you? Do you ever wish things had been different?" "I wish you hadn't had to suffer," she said. "I wish I hadn't had to watch you suffer. But everything that came after Sophie, the community work, the way we love each other now, it's like we're living in full color instead of black and white." A year later, I received another call from Dr. Martinez. This time, she wanted to tell me about a patient, a young father with acute pancreatitis, similar to my case but caught earlier in the progression. "His family is terrified," she said. "The standard treatment isn't working as well as we'd hoped. I know this is a lot to ask, but would you consider talking to them? They've heard about your recovery, and I think it might help to hear from someone who's been where they are." "Of course," I said without hesitation. His name was James and he was 32 years old with twin daughters and a wife who looked like she hadn't slept in days. When I walked into his hospital room, I saw my own story reflected back at me, the fear, the uncertainty, the desperate hope that love might somehow be enough to tip the scales toward healing. "Michael." James's wife stood up from her chair beside his bed. "Dr. Martinez said you might be willing to talk to us." "I'm here for whatever you need," I said, settling into the familiar chair that so many visitors use in hospital rooms. "Do you want to tell me what's been happening?" We talked for 2 hours. I shared my story not to give false hope, but to offer the perspective that healing could take many forms, that hope was worth holding on to even in the darkest moments, that being surrounded by love created conditions where miraculous things could happen. "Did you really think you were going to die?" James asked, his voice weak but curious. "Yes," I said honestly. For a while, dying felt more likely than living. But I had people who refused to accept that outcome, who kept believing in possibilities I couldn't see. "How do you find peace with the uncertainty?" his wife asked. "You focus on what you can control," I said. "You love each other as completely as possible. You take each day as it comes. You trust that whatever happens you're not facing it alone." James recovered. Not as dramatically as I had, but steadily and completely. His case became another data point in the growing body of research about acute pancreatitis recovery, another family that got to go home together, another story that proved healing was possible even when it seemed impossible. But more than that, James and his family became part of our extended community. They started volunteering at the hospital, visiting other families in crisis, passing on the hope that had been given to them. "It's like a chain," Rachel observed one evening as we were getting ready for bed. "Your recovery gave hope to James's family, and now they're giving hope to others. It keeps multiplying." "Maybe that's how healing really works," I said. "Not just fixing what's broken but creating connections that make everyone stronger." As I write this, it's been 3 years since that terrible October night when I thought my story was ending. In that time, Sophie has grown from a cautious 7-year-old into a confident 10-year-old who wants to be a doctor so she can help families stay together when people get sick. Rachel and I have expanded our volunteer work to include training programs for families dealing with medical crises. Lucky has become something of a therapy cat, somehow knowing exactly when someone needs a warm, purring presence. The community center has become a model for similar projects in other Detroit neighborhoods. The memorial wall has inspired similar installations in 3 other cities. And the nonprofit I started has helped build playgrounds, community gardens, and affordable housing units across the metropolitan area. But the real measure of these 3 years isn't in the projects completed or the lives touched, significant as those may be. It's in the quiet moments, Sophie falling asleep between Rachel and me during family movie nights, Sunday morning pancakes that stretch into afternoon conversations, the way we've learned to say, "I love you," not just as an expression of feeling, but as a daily commitment to showing up for each other no matter what. Last week, Father Williams stopped by the community center while I was there checking on a repair project. "You know," he said, looking around at the bustling activity, seniors playing cards, children doing homework at the tutoring tables, parents chatting while their toddlers played in the children's area, "this place has become something special." "It's not the building," I said. "It's the people who fill it." "Both," he corrected gently. "The building provides the space but you provided the vision. And the vision came from your experience of almost losing everything and then finding it again. Do you really think my getting sick was part of some larger plan?" I asked a question that had been on my mind for 3 years. Father Williams was quiet for a long moment, watching a group of teenagers work together on a science project. "I think suffering is real and random and often senseless," he said finally. "But I also think some people have the gift of transforming their suffering into something that serves others. Whether that's part of a plan or just the beautiful resilience of the human spirit, does it matter? What matters is that you chose to build something good from something terrible." That night, I told Rachel and Sophie about the conversation. "I like Father Williams," Sophie said, looking up from the puzzle we were working on together. "He doesn't try to make hard things sound easy, but he also doesn't make you feel scared about them." "That's wisdom," Rachel said. "Knowing that life includes both difficulty and beauty, and that we get to choose how to respond to both." "Is that what you did, Daddy?" Sophie asked. "When you were sick, did you choose to respond with beauty?" I thought about those dark nights in the hospital, about the moments when pain and fear seemed overwhelming, about the gradual recognition that I was surrounded by love even in the midst of crisis. "I think I chose to let other people love me," I said. "And then I chose to pass that love on to others. Sometimes that's all we can do, receive love when we need it and give it when we can." Sophie nodded seriously, the way she did when she was processing something important. "I think that's probably enough," she said. "Love, I mean. I think it's probably enough to fix most things." Looking at my family, my wife who never gave up hope, my daughter who chose us as much as we chose her, even Lucky stretched across all our laps like he was trying to hold us together, I thought Sophie might be right. Maybe love isn't enough to fix everything. Maybe some things stay broken, some people don't recover, some families don't get the happy endings they deserve. But love is enough to make the trying worthwhile. It's enough to give meaning to the effort, purpose to the struggle, and hope to the journey. And sometimes, if we're very lucky and open to possibilities we can't yet imagine, love is enough to heal what everyone thought was beyond healing, not just in our bodies, but in our hearts, our families, and our communities. 3 years ago, a priest told me to prepare to say goodbye. Minutes later, a doctor told me I was already healing. Both things were true. I was saying goodbye to the man I had been, to the life I had been living, to the assumption that I knew what my story would look like. And I was healing not just physically, but into someone who understood that every day is a gift, every relationship is sacred, and every act of love has the potential to create ripples of healing that extend far beyond what we can see. That's the story I wanted to tell. Not just about surviving a medical crisis, but about learning to live fully, gratefully, and in service to something larger than ourselves. It's a story that's still being written, one day at a time, one act of love at a time, one choice to hope at a time. And from where I sit tonight, surrounded by my family in the house that has become our haven, With Lucky purring on Sophie's lap while she reads a book about veterinary science and Rachel plans next week's volunteer schedule at the hospital, I can honestly say it's the most beautiful story I could have imagined. Even if I never could have imagined it myself.